Welcome to CED's Leadership in Challenging Times series, where we feature the outstanding business leaders who are recipients of CED's Distinguished Leadership Awards. I am Laura Esposito Murray, President of the Committee for Economic Development, the Public Policy Center of the Conference Board. And this year, CED is paying special tribute to business leaders and their company teams who have helped our nation navigate the many challenges before us, including defeating the pandemic, an economic recovery that provides equal opportunity for all Americans, building a more civil and just society, and upholding a rules-based international order. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with our 2022 honoree, Marc Casper, Chairman, President, and CEO of Thermo Fisher Scientific. Thermo Fisher, a world leader in advancing science, is a company of over 100,000 team members. And under Marc's leadership, the Thermo Fisher team has helped their customers diagnose diseases, develop new treatments, promote global sustainability, and keep people safe. And they have done this with a purpose-driven commitment to diversity, inclusion, and sustainability. It's my privilege to welcome you, Marc.
Lori, thanks for having me and for taking the time today to do this interview.
Well, it's truly our privilege, and I'd like to start by going back to the beginning of the pandemic. You and the Thermo Fisher team have played a fundamental, indispensable role in helping the country and the world during the COVID-19 crisis, including in the areas of diagnostic PCR testing and vaccine technology and production. Thermo Fisher is a very large company. How are you able to respond so rapidly? And what were the key components of that leadership success?
So Lori, first, none of this happens without the remarkable colleagues we have around the world. I mean, they really did incredible work during the early days of the pandemic to help society respond to the challenges we were all facing. You know, if I think back to 2020, and actually we kicked off the year January with our leadership meeting, and the topic we talked about back then, this is long before the pandemic was front and center, was we talked about speed at scale. And what we were focused on is how do you take the advantages of a large company, make it relevant, and outweigh any of the disadvantages, that complexity that comes with the size of a larger company. And that was the focus of our leadership at the beginning of that year. And I think we are quite lucky that that was what we were focused on, given what we had to do in the subsequent months in responding to the pandemic. And, you know, we were able to scale in a very dramatic way the response to PCR testing, ultimately on a number of the therapies and vaccines that we're also familiar with.
And that's an understatement on how you were able to really scale so quickly. You had many challenges and that you had to confront, but two of the main ones were supply chains and manufacturing capacity. And these are areas that are still impacting domestic and global recovery. So how are you able to successfully meet those challenges, and what lessons can we take forward as we prepare for the next public health crisis?
Yeah, so if I think back then, right, it was so clear of the importance of what we needed to do that you were able to mobilize your supply base, your executive talent, all the colleagues around the purpose here of responding to the pandemic, scaling up testing, scaling up clinical trial material, all the things that we needed to do. And you didn't need to spend a lot of time on the why, right? That was very obvious. And what we did is we took as much creativity as we could to knock down every obstacle that we had. You know, as I fast forward to the last year or so, when we think more broadly about, you know, strong economic growth coming out through the pandemic, the supply chain disruptions that we see in all aspects of our life, some of the skills that we learned about planning and collaborating and, you know, soliciting the best ideas from everybody you can to navigate challenges, they're still relevant today. And some of it, you know, it's really around investments, you know, in securing your supply chain, building redundancy. And, you know, we've been doing some of that as well. But it's amazing that even as we sit here late in 2022, we're still talking about some of the supply chain challenges out there and still work to be done to navigate them.
So I want to pick up your thought on collaboration. How important was collaboration between the public and private sector to mitigate the pandemic? And these are issues that CED has traditionally focused on since its founding in 1942, that the importance of that collaboration. Did you see that in the efforts to combat COVID-19?
Yeah, I mean, collaboration was incredible, actually, in terms of mobilizing the response. If I think about the public-private interactions, we supported, over 50 different countries in the response, and all 50 states here in the US. And you're dealing with the executive branch that are all for the first time facing a new challenge, right? And, and none of us had faced this. So you learned a lot about what worked and what didn't. And I think the things where, if I took lessons learned, those governments that defined what they were trying to accomplish, but not define the solution, but actually just articulate what goal were they trying to solve, they actually unlocked a level of creativity that I think made a huge difference. And if I can give you an example, in the early days of the pandemic, one of the things that, we needed to do was scale up diagnostic testing. The UK government actually used the military in collaboration with us to identify every relevant instrument across the country. And they actually picked up the instruments and put them into labs that would have the capability to run at scale, right? And, no one had thought of that, but by solving, or identifying what the problem was, we were able to creatively come up with a solution. We had incredible levels of collaboration with the FDA in the United States, where the FDA was very clear about what problems they were trying to solve, as opposed to, them reviewing our solutions. They said, actually, it would be really relevant if companies could do X or Y. And that level of open dialogue, I think it made a huge difference in terms of the positive impact that we saw from a societal standpoint.
So some analysts are saying that we've already have forgotten the lessons of COVID-19 if you're looking at what's happening with the spread of monkeypox. And I was just wondering, what are the areas that you think need most improvement in terms of collaboration?
Yeah, when I think about how do you prepare for future health problems, I think one of the ones interesting in the US is what's called ARPA-H. And the way that I think about that, if you think about defense as an analogy, right? Defense spending is spread across a number of different disciplines to deal with what might happen. And the hope is actually that you don't actually have to use much of what is invested, but that you're prepared. And ARPA-H is the healthcare equivalent of investing in capabilities and technologies to address potential problems, so that should we face something that was unexpected, we're better prepared than we were back in 2020 with COVID. And I think that would be an example of what you can do from a lessons learned. I think the thing that is always going to be a challenge is that governments are relatively short-lived before the next election cycle, and investing in infrastructure and capabilities, which feels like a lower priority. We need to keep doing that if we want to make sure that we're prepared for future challenges.
So the central aspect of everything that Thermo Fisher has been working on has been basically to return our society, return the global community to a level of normalcy with the testing, the tracing, the vaccines, and booster development and distribution. Do you think the US now has achieved that acceptable level of risk regarding the virus? And if not, when do you think we'll get there?
There's clearly COVID fatigue, right? And that is part of it, which is has been so present for so long. And it's obviously the disease is still quite present in the community. So what we want to make sure as a society is that we're monitoring the disease, that we understand if variants, start to develop that are of concern, so that we can actually respond, right? If we need to go back to masking or whatever it is, or need a new therapy, we want to make sure that we're really investing and staying on top of how the pandemic, or ultimately an endemic, is evolving, so that we're not caught flat-footed. I think that's the one area that I worry a little bit about, with so much of our life been around COVID, that we don't go to ignore it 100%, but rather keep a close eye on it, so that if we need to do something different, we're prepared to do so.
And do you think mRNA technology is going to be able to keep ahead of the variants in terms of boosters?
Yeah, there's been a number of investments across a number of vaccine technologies, including mRNA, and you're still seeing a high level of activity, a high level of clinical trial activity, and that should allow, vaccination to dampen the health concerns of getting a variant, and in combination with therapies that look to be effective, that should put us in a spot where the disease is much more manageable than it was a couple of years ago.
So I'd like to step back and address the fact that Thermo Fisher has an excellent reputation as a values-based company. And what you're doing in terms of the entire field of biotech, obviously there are very many good purposes that could come out of biotechnology, but there are also problems that could develop from this technology. How do you incorporate those challenges into your business strategy?
Yeah, if you think about our enabling capabilities, right, the life science research tools that we develop, the services that we provide for gene therapies and cell therapies, they make an incredibly positive impact on society. If I think about my own personal experience, I had two members of my immediate family have melanoma, and when they had it back in the 80s and 90s, it was basically a death sentence for them, unfortunately. And today, because of the advances, it's a disease that there's actually medicines that make a huge difference to, right? So I see all of the good, but like anything, things can be used for nefarious purposes. And the way that we try to make sure that our products are used for good things, we have a bioethics committee that makes sure that when we're launching something, we understand what potential risks are. We educate, whether it's our customers, whether it's governments, to make sure that the products are used for the intended use, which is to make a really positive impact on society. But it does need to be monitored and certainly looked after.
And your role as CEO, there's been a lot of debate about the role of the CEO in terms of business and society. How do you make those decisions about what to weigh in on and what not to weigh in on terms of public policy issues?
Lori, I think it starts out the company exists to enable our customer success, right? And the only way to do that is to have engaged colleagues. So if something's important to our colleagues, important to our customers, it's going to become a priority from our perspective. And I think that's the first level of filter that we use, whether we're going to, spend time on an issue. And if you think about a couple of the ones that are deeply ingrained in the company, right? The power of diversity and inclusion, and making the company a better place, a more competitive organization by tapping into the incredible talent around the world. That one's very straightforward, right? It might be a lot of hard work to bring that to life, but it's very straightforward. Sustainability is in the same boat, right? Which is, we want to make sure that we're having the minimal impact on the world from a sustainability perspective, and that we're responsible to leave the planet in a better place than where we inherited it, right? So those things are straightforward. On other social issues where companies have weighed in or not, we try to use the lens of, is it super important to our colleagues? And if it is, we may weigh in. And if it's not, then we let others, take the lead on those types of topics.
And then circling back to your mission, which is to enable your customers to make the world healthier, cleaner, safer. What do you see as the most important challenges ahead?
If I think about over half of our activity is supporting the pharmaceutical and biotech industry, and the amazing progress that's happening in science about the understanding of disease and how to address it, one of the things that we're really passionate about is taking our expertise, our capabilities, our investments to reduce the cost and time of bringing the medicine to market, right? That's one of the things that we're really passionate about, because we want to be able to have medicines be more accessible to a larger and larger part of the world where it's relevant. And therefore, that's something that we're investing behind to make a really big difference. And, one of the things that we're happy to make a contribution to.
But to say that we're in challenging times is probably an understatement, and we're heading into even more unknown economic repercussions that may be happening in the next quarter and beyond into the next year. What are the main components of the leadership advice that you can share on how to address these challenges?
Yeah, in every period of time, there's always something that's new that's thrown at an organization, thrown at leaders that you have to address, right? Who would have thought that we had to, navigate a pandemic, and now we navigate supply chain, a war in Europe, inflation, and the potential for recession. So different challenges. The good news is I think everyone has a lot more confidence in the ability to navigate whatever the world might throw at it, given the period that we just came through. I think the advice that at least I take to heart for myself is that, really be open-minded to different solutions. So, solicit ideas. We were born with 2 ears and 1 mouth, and I think there's a reason for that. And if you're constantly trying to get the best thinking and evolving to address whatever the world is, you're going to come through it just fine. And so I think that's one. And then the second is, if something's worthy, if something's important, it's amazing if you take a smart group of people, what they can accomplish, and never lower your standards in that process. So I think, in a way we can be very demanding, but we're always looking for the best ideas and the best solutions.
Well, it's been a very interesting year. It's been a very interesting couple of years. And what I find really fascinating about our discussion is that at the very top, when you said the most helpful thing in terms of collaboration and working with governments around the world is to ask the question and state what the goal is, and allow innovation to take place among the stakeholders who are trying to solve those problems. Really fascinating, Marc. And I want to conclude by saying thank you so much for joining us. It is truly our privilege to be acknowledging you and the Thermo Fisher team in New York in October, and we can't wait to see you there.
Lori, thank you. It's a tremendous honor, and we're looking forward to the session and event in October.
Thanks again.